The valet stand at the Ardmore Club closed its book to anyone whose car did not meet a standard, and Russell Pike had been the man holding that book for 11 years. He decided who pulled into the circle and who was waved toward the public lot 4 blocks down. He told himself he was protecting something. He had never once asked what. The man came on foot. That was the first thing Russell noticed on a cold Thursday morning in the 3rd week of October. And it was the thing he kept coming back to later, after everything, when he sat in a room with no windows and tried to explain himself to people who no longer found his explanations interesting. The man came on foot, not from a car, not from a service the way deliveries came. He walked up Reading Road through the gray light at 7:06, a tall man in a charcoal hooded sweatshirt and jeans gone soft at the knees from washing, work boots scuffed at the toe, and he stopped at the edge of the Ardmore's brick drive and looked up at the building the way a man looks at a thing he has been thinking about for a long time. Russell watched him from the heated booth beside the valet stand. He cataloged the man the way he cataloged everyone who approached the circle. Shoes first, always the shoes. Then the watch. Then the way the person carried their shoulders, because money had a posture, and so did the lack of it, and Russell had spent 11 years learning to read the difference in the first 4 seconds. The shoes were worn. There was no watch. The shoulders were level and easy and gave away nothing, and that last part bothered Russell in a way he could not name, because in his experience, men who arrived on foot in old boots did not carry themselves like they owned the air they stood in. The man's name was Denzel Washington. Russell did not know that yet. He would not know it for another 40 minutes, and by the time he learned it, the knowledge would be the least useful thing he had ever been handed. Denzel stood at the edge of the drive and looked at the Ardmore Club the way you look at a building that remembers you, even if no one inside it does. The clubhouse was 104 years old, limestone and dark brick, ivy clipped into careful borders around the tall windows. A brass plaque beside the entrance listed the founding members in a typeface that had not changed since 1921. Behind the main building, the golf course rolled out in long green terraces toward a stand of oaks that had been there longer than the club, and beyond the oaks, the city of Cincinnati went on with its morning, indifferent to the small private world the Ardmore had built behind its hedges. Denzel was not looking at the golf course. He was looking at the east wing. The low addition with the wide service entrance and the loading dock where the kitchen took its deliveries, and the small flat-roofed structure beside it that most members had never noticed because it was not built to be noticed. He looked at that building for a long time. Then he walked up the brick drive toward the entrance, and Russell Pike stepped out of his booth to stop him. "Help you?" Russell said. He said it the way he had learned to say it, polite on the surface and closed underneath, a sentence that sounded like an offer and functioned as a wall. "Morning," Denzel said. "I'm looking for the facilities office." I understood it was around the east side. "You a vendor?" "I'm starting work here today." Denzel said it plainly, no edge to it, a man stating a fact he had no reason to dress up. Maintenance. I was told to ask for a man named Fields. Russell looked at him. He looked at the boots and the hooded sweatshirt and the absence of any vehicle, and the picture assembled itself in his mind the way it always did, fast and complete and wrong. A maintenance hire. A day laborer. Someone who would push a mop across the floors that members walked on and empty the bins in the locker rooms and be gone by the time anyone who mattered arrived. Russell relaxed by a precise and ugly degree, the way a man relaxes when he has decided that the person in front of him ranks below him and therefore requires nothing from him but instruction. "Service entrance is around back," Russell said. "East side, like you said. You don't come up the main drive. This is the member circle. Staff and vendors use the back. You understand me?" "I understand you," Denzel said. He did not argue. He did not explain. He turned and walked back down the brick drive the way he had come and rounded the east side of the building toward the service entrance, and Russell watched him go and felt the small satisfaction of a boundary correctly enforced. He went back into his heated booth. He did not think about the man again for 40 minutes. When he thought about him again, it was because his supervisor came out to the valet stand with a face the color of paper and told him who the man in the hooded sweatshirt actually was. But that came later. For now, Russell sat in his booth and watched a black Mercedes pull into the circle, and he stepped out smiling, because the Mercedes was the kind of car the book was kept for. The Ardmore Club ran on a document that did not officially exist. There was the member handbook, leather-bound, 40 pages, revised every 2 years by a committee that took the revising seriously. It covered dress codes and guest policies, and the hours of the grill room and the etiquette of the practice green. Every member received a copy. Most never read past the first 10 pages. That was the document that existed. The other document was the one Russell Pike enforced, and Vance Caro refined, and a dozen people below them carried in their heads without ever writing down, because writing it down would have made it real in a way that everyone preferred to avoid. It was the unwritten standard. The understanding of who belonged in the circle and who belonged at the service entrance, and it had nothing to do with the handbook and everything to do with the 4-second read that men like Russell performed on every face that approached the building. Vance Caro was the club's general manager, and he had built the unwritten document into something close to an art. He was 51 years old, trim, expensively barbered, and he wore the same kind of quiet wool suit every day in a gray, so dark it read as black until the light caught it. He had run the Ardmore for 9 years, and in those 9 years he had developed a theory of the place that he believed in completely and never said out loud. The theory was that the club's value lay not in what it offered, but in what it refused. Anyone could offer a golf course and a grill room. The Ardmore offered the certainty that the wrong people would never get in. That was the product. That was what the dues paid for. And Vance had appointed himself the guardian of the refusal. He believed his cruelty was stewardship. That was the thing about Vance that the people who worked under him understood and the members never saw. When he turned someone away, when he found a reason to deny a guest pass or question a vendor's credentials or have a staff member written up for using the wrong corridor, he did not experience it as cruelty. He experienced it as care. He was protecting the standard. He was holding the line that other people were too soft or too sentimental to hold. And because he believed this so completely, nothing anyone could say ever reached him. You cannot argue a man out of a thing he thinks is virtue. Denzel found the facilities office on the east side, a low room off the loading dock with a metal desk and a corkboard and the smell of machine oil and old coffee. The man behind the desk was named Marcus Fields, and he was 63 years old. And he had been keeping the Ardmore's boilers running and its irrigation working and its 104-year-old building from quietly falling apart for 19 years. He looked up when Denzel came in. He looked at the work order in his hand and then at the man standing in the doorway, and something passed across his face that was not the 4-second read Russell had performed. It was slower than that. It was a man looking at another man and finding that the picture did not quite settle. "You, the new maintenance," Marcus said. It was not quite a question. "That's what they told me to say." Denzel stepped in and offered his hand, and Marcus shook it, and Marcus noticed the grip, firm and unhurried, and noticed too that the man's hands were a working man's hands, calloused across the palm, a thin white scar along the side of the right thumb. Whatever else this was, the hands were real. "They told you to say," Marcus repeated. "Funny way to put it. I do a lot of things," Denzel said, and left it there. Marcus let it go, because Marcus had learned over 19 years that everyone who came through that door carried something, and his job was the boilers, not the stories. He handed Denzel a ring of keys and a laminated map of the service corridors, and walked him through the building the back way, through the kitchen where the morning crew was prepping, and the long gray corridor behind the locker rooms, and the mechanical room where the heart of the old building thumped and hissed in the dark. And as they walked, Marcus talked, because he was a man who talked when he worked, and Denzel listened in a way that Marcus would later describe to his wife as the most complete listening he had ever experienced from a stranger. Denzel asked about the East Wing, the low addition with the flat roof beside the loading dock. "That's the old caddy house," Marcus said. "Boarded up now. Club used to put the caddies in there, back when. Lockers, a washroom, a little common room. They stopped using it maybe 30 years ago when the caddy program wound down. Now it's just storage. Why? No reason," Denzel said. But he stopped in the corridor for a moment and looked through a dusty window into the dark of the old caddy house, and Marcus saw his face change, the way still water changes when something moves underneath it, and then it was gone, and Denzel turned, and they kept walking. By the end of the first week, 3 people at the Ardmore Club had formed an opinion of the new maintenance man, and all 3 opinions were wrong in different directions. Marcus Fields thought Denzel was a man hiding from something, and he was half right. The morning crew in the kitchen thought he was quiet and easy and helped carry the heavy delivery crates without being asked, and they were right but did not know why it mattered. And Vance Caro thought nothing of him at all, which was the most dangerous read of the 3, because Vance not thinking of you meant Vance had filed you below the threshold of consideration, and people below that threshold were, in Vance's world, available to be moved and corrected and erased without the friction of conscience. Denzel worked. He fixed a leaking valve in the women's locker room that had been dripping for 6 weeks because the part was on back order and no one had thought to fabricate a temporary fix. He cleaned and oiled the door hinges on the main entrance so they stopped announcing every arrival with a groan. He repaired the irrigation controller on the 7th green, a job the outside contractor had quoted at $4,200, and Denzel did it in an afternoon with a soldering iron and a part that cost $31.80. Marcus watched him do it and said nothing. But that night, Marcus went home and told his wife that the new man knew more about the building systems after 5 days than men who had worked there 5 years, and that it did not add up, and that he had decided to stop trying to make it add up because the man was good and the building needed good. Denzel kept finding reasons to be near the east wing, the old caddy house. He repaired a section of the loading dock railing that did not strictly need repairing. He cleared the gutters on the flat roof. He spent his lunch breaks sitting on the dock steps with a sandwich, looking at the boarded windows of the caddy house the way a man looks at a room he used to live in. Marcus noticed. Marcus did not ask. The first real collision happened on a Tuesday at 11:40 in the morning. A member named Whitfield Crane had hosted a foursome that morning, and one of his guests had left a putter leaning against the rack outside the pro shop, and somewhere in the next hour the putter went missing. Whitfield Crane was a man who had inherited a chemical distribution business and a temperament, and he had decided within 90 seconds that the putter had been stolen, and he had decided within another 90 that the thief was the maintenance man he had seen near the cart barn that morning. He went to Vance Caro's office and said so. Vance came out to the service corridor where Denzel was repacking a wheel bearing on a utility cart, and he stood over him, and he said the thing that would later become the first item on a long list. There's a putter missing from the pro shop rack. Scotty Cameron, custom grip, member's personal property. You were seen near the barn this morning. Denzel set down the bearing. He looked up at Vance, and he did not stand, and the not standing was not defiance. It was simply a man finishing a thought before he changed his posture. I was near the barn this morning, he said. I was fixing the door track. It was off its rollers. That's not an answer to my question. I didn't take a putter, Denzel said. I don't golf. Something in the flatness of it, the complete absence of the fear that Vance was accustomed to producing, made Vance's voice climb half a register. Empty your locker. I don't have a locker. I have a hook by the boiler room. Then we'll look at the hook. They looked at the hook. There was a jacket and a thermos and a paperback book with the cover worn soft. There was no putter. Vance stood in the boiler room and looked at the thermos and the book, and a more reflective man would have felt the first cold touch of having been wrong, but Vance was not a reflective man. He had built a self that could not be wrong, only insufficiently obeyed, and so he did not apologize. He said, "We'll be watching the cameras. If it turns up that you handled it, you're done here, and we file a report." And he turned and walked back up the corridor toward the part of the building where the carpet started. Denzel watched him go. He picked the book up off the hook, smoothed a page that had bent when Vance set it down, and put it back. Then he picked up the wheel bearing and finished the job. The putter turned up at 4 that afternoon. Whitfield Crane's guest had put it in the wrong travel bag and driven it home to Indian Hill. The guest called the pro shop to say so, mildly embarrassed, and the pro shop told Vance. And Vance did not come back down to the service corridor to say he had been wrong. He simply let the matter close the way water closes over a stone, and he expected, the way he always expected, that the silence would be understood as the end of it. Marcus heard about the whole thing from the kitchen crew. He came and found Denzel in the mechanical room that evening and stood in the doorway for a moment. They tell me Caro had you on the missing putter. He did. And it turned up in some fella's car in Indian Hill. So I heard. He come down to say he was wrong? Denzel almost smiled. No. Marcus shook his head slowly. He had worked under Vance Caro for 9 years, and he had stopped expecting the man to apologize for anything sometime in the second year, and he had watched good people leave the Ardmore over that exact quality, the way Vance could be wrong about you in front of others and never once feel the weight of needing to set it right. You let it go awful easy, Marcus said. I've been wrongly accused of bigger things than a putter, Denzel said. He said it lightly, but Marcus heard the floor underneath it, the way you hear a deep note under a melody, and Marcus filed it away with all the other things about this man that did not settle, and he went home and told his wife that the new maintenance man had been wrongly accused of something big once, and that he carried it the way a man carries an old injury, favoring it without thinking, and that he still could not make the man add up. To understand why Denzel Washington walked up Reading Road on foot on a cold October morning and asked for a maintenance job at a club that would never have let him through the front door as a guest, you have to go back 41 years to a boy of 14 carrying a golf bag that weighed almost as much as he did across the same 7th green he would one day repair in an afternoon. His father had carried bags at the Ardmore before him. His father, Eli Washington, had caddied at the club for 22 years, walking the course 6 days a week through summers that turned the fairways to glass and Octobers that turned them to iron, reading greens for men who never learned his last name. Eli had been the best caddy the Ardmore ever had. The members requested him by his first name, the way you request a good table, and Eli had read their putts and replaced their divots and laughed at their jokes and carried their bags up the long hill of the 18th in the heat, and at the end of the day, he had walked to the old caddy house on the east side of the building and changed out of his whites and walked home, because the caddy house was where the men who carried the bags were kept, separate from the men whose bags they carried. Denzel had grown up in that caddy house in the way that a son grows up in his father's workplace. From the age of 8, he had come on Saturdays and sat in the little common room and done his homework while the caddies waited for their loops. He had learned the course before he learned algebra. He knew which greens broke toward the city and which broke away, knew the wind on the 12th and the false front on the 4th, knew it all from listening to the men in the caddy house talk through their day, and at 14 he started carrying bags himself, walking beside his father, learning the trade the way the trade had always been learned, by walking it. He learned something else in that caddy house, too. He learned how the club saw the men inside it. He was there the afternoon a member named Prentice accused his father of moving a ball, and he watched his father stand still and quiet and take it, because a caddy who argued with a member was a caddy who did not work the next day, and he watched the caddy master, a heavy, kind man named Sutton, smooth it over without ever once saying the obvious thing, which was that Eli Washington had not moved. Any ball and everyone present knew it. He watched his father absorb the accusation the way Denzel himself had absorbed Vance Caro's accusation about the putter 41 years later, and the symmetry of it, when he felt it on that Tuesday in October, had nearly stopped his breath. Eli Washington died when Denzel was 19, of a heart that had carried too many bags up too many hills. The club sent no one to the funeral. The members who had requested him by name for 22 years did not know he had died, because the caddy house had wound down by then, and Eli had been let go 2 years before with a handshake and no pension, his 22 years valued at a firm grip and a few words at the loading dock. Denzel sat in the funeral and was 19 years old, and made a promise to his father that he did not fully understand at the time, a promise that had taken him 41 years and a fortune most people could not imagine to come back and keep. Because Denzel Washington was not a maintenance man. He had been many things in 41 years. He had left Cincinnati at 19 with $200 and his father's last name and a refusal that had hardened in him at the funeral into something like an engine. He had worked construction in Houston and learned how buildings went up. He had bought his first piece of property at 26, a fourplex with a bad roof that he fixed himself, and he had bought the building next to it at 29, and by 40, he owned commercial real estate in 9 states and a development company that bore a name no one would connect to a caddy's son. And by 55, he was the kind of wealthy that does not announce itself, the kind that signs a 9-figure document and does not change expression, the kind that can buy a thing quietly and let the world find out later or never. 8 months before he walked up Reading Road in a hooded sweatshirt, Denzel Washington had bought the Ardmore Club. He had bought it through a holding company, the way he bought everything, layered behind enough corporate structure that the membership committee had approved the sale of the controlling interest to an investment group without ever learning whose hands were actually closing around the 104-year-old building. The club had been bleeding money for a decade, its membership aging, its dues no longer covering the cost of keeping a limestone building from the 1920s standing. The board had been relieved to find a buyer who promised to keep the club running as it was, who asked for no changes to the membership, who seemed content to be a silent owner. They did not know the silent owner was the son of a man they had let go at the loading dock with a handshake. They did not know he had walked the back corridors of their building as a boy. They did not know that the thing he had asked for in the purchase agreement, the one specific provision his lawyers had insisted on without explanation, was a clause guaranteeing the structural preservation of the old caddy house on the east side, the boarded-up building beside the loading dock that no one had thought about in 30 years. He owned the place. And he had come to see it not from the owner's box but from the service corridor, because there was a thing he needed to learn before he revealed himself, and you cannot learn it from the owner's box. You can only learn it from the floor. He needed to know whether the club still treated the men who carried the bags the way it had treated his father. He needed to know whether anything had changed. And so he had put on his oldest boots and his son's old hooded sweatshirt and walked up the drive on foot, and the first thing that happened, before he had been on the property 4 minutes, was that a man at the valet stand had read his shoes and sent him to the back. He had his answer before he reached the facilities office. But he stayed, because an answer is not the same as a reckoning, and Denzel Washington had not come back to Cincinnati after 41 years for an answer. The breaking point came on a Saturday, and it came because of a boy who was not a member's son and did not belong, in Vance Caro's accounting, on the property at all. His name was Theo Branch. He was 19 years old, a freshman at the University of Cincinnati on a partial scholarship that did not cover the partial that mattered, and he had taken a weekend job in the Ardmore's kitchen washing dishes and hauling trash because the kitchen paid $11.40 an hour, and his bus pass cost what it cost, and his mother's hours had been cut at the hospital where she cleaned. Theo worked the back of the kitchen and stayed out of sight, which was the arrangement everyone understood. The members did not see the people who washed their dishes. That was part of what the dues bought. On that Saturday in early November, a pipe under the kitchen's 3-compartment sink let go, and water began spreading across the floor toward the dining room, and Marcus Fields was 40 minutes away at a supply house, and so the kitchen manager sent Theo to find the maintenance man. Theo did not know the service corridors well. He took a wrong turn looking for the mechanical room, and the wrong turn put him in the carpeted hallway outside the grill room at the exact moment that Vance Caro was walking a prospective member and his wife toward lunch. Vance saw a kitchen worker in a wet apron standing on the member carpet, and the sight of it, the wrongness of it, the violation of the unwritten document, moved through him faster than thought. "What are you doing up here?" It was not a question. Vance's voice was low and controlled and carrying, pitched to be heard by the prospective member as a demonstration of standards. "This is the member floor. You don't belong up here. Look at you. You're dripping on the carpet. There's water," Theo started. "In the kitchen, the sink, I was sent to find thee." "You were sent to find nothing up here. There is a service corridor. You know there's a service corridor. You people are told." The phrase landed and sat there. You people, and a younger man might have folded under it, but Theo was 19, and his mother had not raised him to fold, and so he made the mistake of standing his ground. "Sir, there's water coming into the dining room. I'm trying to. Get off this floor." Vance stepped close now, close enough that the prospective member and his wife had stopped pretending to look at the wine list and were watching with the particular discomfort of people who do not want to be witnessing this and cannot make themselves leave. "Get off this floor right now, and when you're done, see the kitchen manager, because you won't be working here after today. We don't have positions for people who can't follow the simplest. That's enough." The voice came from the end of the corridor, and it was not loud, and that was what made everyone turn. It was the maintenance man. He was standing by the service door in his charcoal sweatshirt with a pipe wrench in one hand and a coil of plumber's tape in the other, and he had come up from the mechanical room because he had heard the water alarm, and he had arrived in time to see a 51-year-old man in a wool suit backing a 19-year-old against the wall over a wet apron. Vance turned. The interruption, the 2 words, the sheer fact of a maintenance man speaking into a scene that did not concern him, produced in Vance a flush of something close to joy, because here at last was a clean target, a clear violation, a thing he could correct without ambiguity. "Excuse me?" "I said that's enough," Denzel said. He walked up the corridor, unhurried, and he stopped between Vance and the boy, and he said to Theo, quietly, "Go down to the kitchen. Shut the supply valve under the sink. It's the red handle on the left. Turn it clockwise. I'll be right there." And Theo, grateful past speaking, went. Vance watched the boy go and then turned the full weight of himself on Denzel. "You just countermanded me." In front of a guest, on the member floor. "He was sent to find help because the kitchen's flooding," Denzel said. "He found help. That's the whole story." "The story," Vance said, and his voice had gone to the smooth and terrible calm that the staff feared more than his shouting, "is that you have forgotten what you are. You are a fixture here. You are no different from the boiler you maintain. You do not speak to me. You do not speak for the staff. You do not stand on this carpet and tell me that's enough." He was close now, and the prospective member's wife had put her hand on her husband's arm. And Vance, who could read a room when the room contained people who mattered, lowered his voice further and delivered the sentence that he believed would close the matter the way his sentences always closed matters. "Get your thermos and your paperback off that hook by the boiler and get off my property. You're done. I'll have Pike escort you to the gate." And there it was, the ejection. The moral breaking point, delivered not in a shout, but in the cold, satisfied murmur of a man who believed to the center of himself that he was protecting something fine and necessary by throwing a working man off the grounds his father had walked for 22 years. Denzel did not raise his voice. He did not move. He looked at Vance Caro for a long moment, and something settled in his face, the way a thing settles when a long wait is finally over, and he said, "All right." Just that. All right. And he set the pipe wrench down on the service cart, because the kitchen was still flooding and the wrench would be needed, and he walked back toward the service door to go shut the water off, because whatever else was true, the building still needed someone to stop the water, and that had been true his whole life and was true now. Russell Pike was called up to escort him out. Russell came up from the valet stand, pleased to have been summoned, pleased to be the instrument of the ejection, and he found the maintenance man in the kitchen on his knees in 2 inches of water, tightening a compression, fitting under the 3-compartment sink while the boy named Theo held a flashlight. The water had stopped spreading. Denzel finished the fitting, tested it, wiped his hands on a rag, and stood. "Mr. Caro says you're to leave," Russell said. "I heard him," Denzel said. He looked at Theo. "You did fine." The valve was the right move. "Tell Marcus the fitting's temporary. He'll want to sweat a proper joint on it Monday." Then he walked out through the service entrance the way he had been told to on his first morning, around the east side of the building, past the boarded windows of the old caddy house, and he stopped there for a moment in the cold, and he put his hand flat against the weathered wood of the door his father had walked through 6 days a week for 22 years, and then he walked down the brick, drive and out the gate and up Reading Road, on foot, the way he had come. Russell watched him go and felt the clean, small satisfaction of a boundary enforced. It lasted 19 hours. The phone call came to Vance Caro's office at 10:07 on Sunday morning. Vance was in early to review the prospective member's application, the one whose lunch had been so unfortunately interrupted, and he was composing in his mind the gracious note he would send smoothing over the incident when his desk phone rang with the internal tone that meant the call was coming from the club's own switchboard. He answered it expecting the front desk. It was the front desk. The front desk attendant's voice was strange, tight, and she said there was a gentleman on the line from a law firm in Chicago calling about the ownership of the club, and that he had asked for Vance by name, and that he had said it was not a matter that could wait until Monday. Vance took the call. The lawyer was courteous and precise and unhurried, and he introduced himself as counsel to the holding company that owned the controlling interest in the Ardmore Club, and he said that he was calling on a Sunday because his client wished a particular matter to be addressed before the start of the business week. He said that his client had become aware of an incident on the property the previous afternoon. He said that his client wished Mr. Caro to understand that the maintenance employee who had been removed from the premises on Saturday was to be reinstated effective immediately with back pay for the missed time and an apology. Vance, who had spent 9 years being the person who decided who belonged, felt the first thread of the floor give way beneath him. "I think there's been some confusion," he said. "The man you're describing isn't an employee we'd want to." "I'd ask you not to finish that sentence," the lawyer said, still courteous. "Because the man I'm describing is the person who owns the building you're sitting in." There was a silence on the line. In 9 years, Vance Caro had never once experienced the specific sensation that moved through him then, the sensation of a certainty he had built his whole self upon beginning to come apart at a seam he had not known was there. "That's not possible," Vance said. "Mr. Washington will be on the property tomorrow morning at 9, the lawyer said. "He'd like the senior staff assembled in the grill room. He's asked me to tell you he intends to keep it brief. Good morning, Mr. Caro." And the line went quiet. Vance sat at his desk. The name had not landed yet, the way a wound does not hurt in the first second. The maintenance man. The thermos in the paperback. The wet boots on his service corridor floor. The man he had thrown off the property in front of a prospective member to demonstrate the standard. He pulled up the ownership records on his computer. The records he had never had reason to look at because the silent owner had always been silent, and he followed the holding company back through one layer and then another. And on the third layer, in a registration document filed 8 months earlier, he found a name listed as the principal of the acquiring entity, Denzel Washington. He looked at it for a long time. Then he did the thing that men like Vance Caro do at the exact moment the truth arrives, the thing that determines everything that comes after. He did not feel shame. Shame would have saved him. What he felt instead, rising through the shock, was the cold machinery of self-justification beginning to turn, the part of him that could not be wrong, only insufficiently understood, already assembling the case for why none of this was his fault. He had followed protocol. He had enforced the standard. How was he to know? The man had presented himself as staff. The man had let him believe it. If anyone was to blame, surely it was the man himself, for the deception, for walking in dressed as something he was not. By the time the sun was fully up over the 7th green on that Sunday morning, Vance Caro had constructed, in the privacy of his own mind, a version of events in which he was the wronged party. He would carry that version into the grill room the next morning. He would carry it, in some form, all the way to the end. At 9 o'clock on Monday morning, the senior staff of the Ardmore Club stood assembled in the grill room, and Denzel Washington walked in through the main entrance, up the brick drive, through the door he had not been permitted to use 11 days earlier. He was not wearing the hooded sweatshirt. He wore a dark suit, well cut and quiet, no tie, and he carried himself exactly as he had carried himself in the old boots, which was the thing that several people in the room noticed and could not stop noticing, because it meant the posture had never been a costume. The man had not changed. Only the clothes had. He came in with 2 people beside him, the Chicago lawyer and a woman from the holding company, and he stood at the head of the grill room where the members took their lunch, and he looked at the staff who had been gathered, and his eyes moved across them without hurry. Russell Pike was there, and Russell had not slept. Marcus Fields was there, and Marcus was not surprised, and the lack of surprise on Marcus's face was the only easy thing in the room. Vance Caro stood near the front in his dark wool suit with the version of events already loaded, the case for his own innocence sitting ready behind his teeth. Denzel spoke. He did not perform. He spoke the way he had spoken to Theo in the flooded kitchen, plain and level and without waste. "Most of you knew me as maintenance," he said. 11 days. My name is Denzel Washington. 8 months ago, a holding company I control bought the controlling interest in this club. That makes me, in the language of the paperwork, the owner. I want to tell you why I came in the way I came in, because you're owed that, and then I'm going to tell you what's going to change. The room was silent. The kind of silence that is not empty, but full of every staff member privately reviewing every interaction they had ever had with the maintenance man, recalculating. "My father carried bags here," Denzel said. Ellie Washington. 22 years. Some of the older members might remember the name, though I doubt it. He was the best caddy this club ever had, and he died without a pension 2 years after they let him go at the loading dock with a handshake. He changed his clothes for 22 years in a building on the east side of this property that most of you have walked past 1,000 times and never wondered about. The old caddy house. I grew up in it. I did my homework in it on Saturdays while my father waited for his loops. He let that sit. I didn't come back here for the golf course. I came back because I needed to know whether anything had changed. Whether this place still decided who was a person and who was a fixture based on a 4-second read at the valet stand. So I put on my old boots and I walked up the drive, and I had my answer before I reached the facilities office, because a man at the valet stand looked at my shoes and sent me to the back. Russell Pike's face did something then that he could not control. "I'm not telling you this to shame any one person," Denzel said, and his eyes moved, briefly, to Russell, and then away, and the mercy in that brief movement was somehow worse than accusation would have been. "I'm telling you because I want you to understand that what happened here this week was not about me. I was never the one at risk. I had a building and a law firm. The person who was at risk was a 19-year-old named Theo Branch, who was about to lose a job he needed because he took a wrong turn carrying a message about a flood. That's the person this is about. Him, and every person who ever stood where he stood and didn't have anyone walk up the corridor and say that's enough." Now he looked at Vance. "Mr. Caro, you fired a man Saturday for standing on the wrong carpet. I'd like you to tell the room why." And here was the moment that decided Vance Caro's life, the fork that every cornered man arrives at. And Vance, given the chance to say the only thing that could have saved any part of him, given the open door of a simple "I was wrong," walked instead through the door he had been building since Sunday morning. "With respect," Vance said, and his voice was steady, because self-righteousness is steadier than truth. "You presented yourself as something you were not. You walked into this club in disguise. You allowed me to believe you were staff. Every action I took based on the information you chose to give me. If I had known who you were, if you had known who I was, you'd have treated me well," Denzel said. "Yes, that's the whole point, Mr. Caro. That's the entire point. You'd have treated me well if you'd known I had money. You treated me like a fixture because you thought I didn't. You've just explained the problem better than I could have. Thank you." Vance's mouth was open. He closed it. He had walked directly into it, and a flicker of awareness of that passed across his face. And even then, even seeing it, he could not bring himself to the words. He doubled down instead, because doubling down was the only structural move left to a self that could not bend. "I followed protocol," he said. "I have always followed protocol. I protected the standards of this club, which is what I was hired to do, and I will not stand here and be." "You're not going to stand here at all," Denzel said. "That part's already decided. But before you go, I want some people to say some things, and I want you to listen, because you've never once had to listen to them, and that's been the privilege you mistook for a standard." He nodded toward the door, and the holding company woman opened it, and 3 people came in. The first was Marcus Fields. Marcus stood in front of the room he had kept warm and dry and standing for 19 years, and he did not look at Vance. He looked at the staff, and he said, "I've worked here longer than anyone in this room. 19 years. In that time, I have been called by the wrong name more times than I can count, and I have been told to use the back corridor when I was carrying a part that would have taken 30 seconds the front way, and I have watched good people quit because there was no way to be right once, mister. Caro had decided you were wrong. I stayed because the building needed me and because I have a family. But I want it on the record, since we're finally putting things on records, that I have spent 19 years being treated as a thing that comes with the building. And I am not a thing." He stopped. His voice had not risen once. "That's all I have." The second was a woman named Delphine Roy, who had served in the grill room for 6 years and been written up twice by Vance for infractions that the rest of the staff knew to be inventions, and who had nearly lost her position the previous spring when Vance reported her for an attitude problem after she asked, once, quietly, whether the staff might be allowed to eat the kitchen's end-of-night surplus, rather than watch it go in the bin. She said, "I asked if we could eat the food that was going to be thrown away. That's the attitude problem that almost cost me my job. I have a daughter. I was asking if I could bring home the bread that was going in the trash anyway. And I was written up for it, and I was made to feel that asking was a kind of theft." She looked at Vance then, the only one of the 3 who did. "I never stole anything from this club. I asked for the garbage, and you made me feel like a criminal for it." The third was Theo Branch. He was 19, and he had not expected to speak, and his hands were not steady. But he stood where the 2 before him had stood, and he said the simplest thing of all. "I took a wrong turn," he said. "I was trying to tell somebody the kitchen was flooding. That's the whole thing I did wrong. I took a wrong turn while I was trying to help, and I was going to lose the job that pays my bus pass and helps my mom, and the only reason I didn't is that a man I thought was the maintenance guy walked up the hall and said, 'That's enough.'" He looked at Denzel, and then he looked back at the staff, not at Vance, never at Vance. "I just think a person should be able to take a wrong turn while they're trying to help and not lose everything for it. That's all. I think that should be allowed." The room was very quiet when Theo finished. The particular quiet that falls after 3 people have said true things in a place built on the agreement not to say them. Denzel let the quiet hold for a moment. Then he said, "Thank you. All 3 of you. You can sit down." He turned back to Vance Caro one last time. "You're relieved as general manager, effective now. Your contract has a cause provision and the holding company's counsel will walk you through it. You'll be escorted to clear your office." He paused. "I'm not doing this because you were rude to me. I want to be clear about that, because I think you'll tell yourself it was personal, and it wasn't. I'm doing it because of Delphine and the bread. I'm doing it because of 19 years of the wrong name. I'm doing it because a boy was about to lose his bus pass over a wrong turn. You were never the standard, Mr. Caro. You were just the man at the door deciding who counted. We don't need that door anymore." Vance Caro stood very still. And then, because he was who he was all the way to the bottom, he said the last thing he would ever say in the Ardmore grill room, and it was not an apology. "You'll run this place into the ground inside 2 years, he said. "Without standards, it's just a building." And he turned and let himself be escorted out, certain to the end that he had been the only thing holding back the flood, never once understanding that he had been the flood. The consequences moved outward from that Monday the way consequences do, not in a single dramatic stroke, but in a series of quiet, documented corrections that were, in their way, more total than any explosion. Vance Caro's contract was terminated for cause, which meant the severance package that would have cushioned a negotiated exit evaporated. He had been a general manager at private clubs for 2 decades, and private club management is a small world that talks to itself. And the story of how the Ardmore's manager had thrown the club's own owner off the property and then refused to apologize to his face traveled that world faster than any reference letter could chase it. He applied for 7 positions in the following 4 months. He received 1 interview. The interview ended early. The story had arrived before him. A man who had spent his career as the keeper of who belonged discovered, at 51, that he no longer belonged anywhere himself, and the thing that would have let him back in, the simple ability to say I was wrong, was the one tool he had never built and could not build now. Russell Pike kept his job. That surprised people, and it surprised Russell most of all. Denzel called him into the facilities office, not the grand office, the metal desk office on the east side, and Russell came in expecting the gate. What he got instead was Denzel sliding a piece of paper across the desk. It was a photograph, old, a little watermarked, of a tall man in caddy whites standing on the first tee with a bag over his shoulder and an easy level set to his shoulders. "That's my father," Denzel said. "You sent me to the back the way somebody probably sent him to the back his whole life. I could fire you for it. I'm not going to." "You know why?" Russell shook his head. "Because firing you doesn't teach you anything except that powerful people can end you, and you already knew that. That's the whole thing you were protecting at the valet stand, the idea that powerful people decide. I want you to learn the other thing. So you're going to keep your job, and you're going to run the valet stand, and there is no longer any book about who pulls into the circle. Everybody pulls into the circle. Member, guest, vendor, the kid washing dishes, his mother coming to pick him up. Everybody comes up the front. You're going to be the man who makes sure of it. You understand me?" It was the same phrase Russell had used on him the first morning. "You understand me." And Russell heard it land. And Russell, to his lasting credit, did the thing Vance Caro could not. He looked at the photograph of Eli Washington for a long moment, and his face came apart, and he said, "Yes, I understand you. I'm sorry. I should have." And Denzel said, "I know. Go on back to work." And that was the end of it, because Denzel Washington had not come back to collect scalps. He had come back to change a door. The thing about the old caddy house was that Denzel had written its preservation into the purchase agreement before he ever walked up the drive, and nobody on the board had understood why a buyer would insist on protecting a boarded-up storage building, and now everybody understood. He had it restored. Not as a monument, he was specific about that with the architects, not a museum, not a plaque and velvet rope shrine to suffering. He had it restored as a working building, the way it had been when it held the men who carried the bags, and he turned it into something the Ardmore had never had. A room for the staff. A real one. With good chairs and a kitchen of their own and lockers that locked and tall windows that let the morning light in, the same east-facing light that had come through those windows when his father changed out of his whites at the end of a long day. Above the door, in plain letters, he had a single line carved, and it was not his father's name, because his father would not have wanted his name on it. It was a sentence instead. Everyone comes UP front. 14 months went by. The Ardmore Club did not run into the ground, the way Vance Caro had promised it would. It did the opposite, though not in a way that showed up first in the numbers. What changed first was harder to measure than dues and easier to feel the moment you walked in. The valet stand under Russell Pike waved everyone up the front drive, and the strange thing, the thing the older members grumbled about for exactly one season and then forgot they had ever minded, was that nothing bad happened. The wrong people did not flood in and ruin everything. The kid washing dishes came up the front, and so did his mother when she came to collect him, and the building did not fall down, and the limestone did not crack, and it turned out that the certainty Vance had sold, the certainty that the wrong people would be kept out, had never actually been the product. It had just been the wall. And when the wall came down, what was behind it was only ever a golf course and a grill room and 104 years of people, some of whom had carried the bags and some of whom had carried nothing heavier than a grievance. Marcus Fields was made director of facilities, with a title and a raise and an office that was still the metal desk office because Marcus liked the metal desk office, and he stopped being called by the wrong name because there was no longer anyone on the property whose job it was to decide that some names were worth learning and some were not. Delphine Roy ran the new staff kitchen in the restored caddy house, and the end-of-night surplus that used to go in the bin went home with whoever needed it, openly, no longer a theft of garbage, but simply the ordinary decency of not throwing away food while people who worked all day went home to empty refrigerators. Her daughter came to the staff room some afternoons after school and did her homework at a table by the east windows, in the same light, in the same room, where another child had once done his homework on Saturdays while his father waited for his loops. Delphine did not know that history. She only knew the room was good and that her daughter was safe in it, and that was enough. Theo Branch kept his job through the school year and was promoted out of the dish pit to the grill room floor, where the tips were better, and he finished his freshman year and started his sophomore year, and the bus pass got paid, and so did the partial that the scholarship had not covered, because a fund had appeared, quietly, administered through the holding company that paid the tuition gap for any Ardmore staff member or staff member's child who was trying to get through school. It did not have Denzel's name on it. Almost nothing did. Theo never knew exactly where it came from. He had his suspicions. He never asked, because he had learned from a man in a hooded sweatshirt who walked up a hallway and said 2 words at the right moment that the people who do the most are usually the ones who say the least about it. And Denzel Washington stopped coming to the Ardmore. That surprised the staff who had come to watch for him, the tall, quiet man who would appear some mornings and walk the back corridors and sit on the loading dock steps with a sandwich. After the caddy house was finished and the fund was running and Russell was waving everyone up the front, he came less and less, and then he did not come at all, and the reason was the simplest one. He had done the thing he came to do. The promise he had made at 19, sitting in a funeral the club did not attend, had been a promise to make this one place treat the next Eli Washington like a man. He had kept it. And a man who has kept a promise does not need to stand around admiring the keeping. He owned the building, but he had never come back for the building. He had come back for the door. And the door was open now, and would stay open, written into the bylaws in language his lawyers had made permanent. Everyone Combs, UP, front, no longer dependent on his presence or anyone's goodwill, but built into the structure itself, the way the only changes that last are the ones you build into the structure. He came one last time on a morning in early spring, before the course opened for the season, when the grass was still coming back and the air still had winter in it. He came on foot. He walked up Reading Road in the gray light the way he had the first morning, and Russell Pike saw him from the valet stand and came out, and this time Russell did not read his shoes. Russell said, "Morning, Mr. Washington." "Come on up." And Denzel said, "Morning, Russell. How's the boy in school?" Because he knew Russell's son had started at the same university as Theo, and Russell said, "Good, real good," and the two of them stood for a moment in the cold, and the easy thing between them was the thing that had been impossible 11 days into the first version of this story and was ordinary now. Denzel walked around the east side, past the restored caddy house, and he stood in front of it and read the line above the door that he had put there. Everwin Combs UP front. He put his hand flat against the door the way he had the day Vance threw him out, except the wood was sound now, sanded and oiled and warm under his palm. A working door on a working building full of working people who came up the front. He stood there for a while. He did not go in. He did not need to. Then he turned and walked back down the brick drive and out the gate and up Reading Road, on foot, the way he had come, and the club went on with its morning behind him, and somewhere in the restored caddy house a child was doing her homework by the east windows in the light, and nobody inside that building would ever again be sent to the back for the crime of how their shoes looked at 7 in the morning. Eli Washington carried bags up that 18th hill for 22 years and died without a pension, and the club did not send anyone to his funeral. His son came back 41 years later and bought the whole thing and gave the men who carry the bags a room with good light and a door that opens to the front. Some debts cannot be paid to the person you owe them to. Eli was gone. Nothing his son built could reach him. But a debt you cannot pay backward, you can sometimes pay forward, to the next person standing where the one you loved once stood. That is not justice. Justice would have been a pension and a seat at the table and a name learned the first time, 41 years ago, when it would have mattered to the man himself. This was not that. This was only the next best thing, which is making sure the next man does not have to wait 41 years for someone to walk up the hall and say that's enough. Think about that for a moment. Think about how many people are standing at a service entrance somewhere right now, carrying something heavy, being read by their shoes, told to use the back. Think about how rarely anyone walks up the hall. And then think about whether you have ever been the one who could have and didn't. This is a work of fiction. The Ardmore Club is not a real place, and Denzel Washington, the character in this story, is a fictional figure created for this telling and is not meant to represent any real person who shares that name. But the things underneath the story are not fiction. The caddy who carried the bags and was let go at the loading dock with a handshake and no pension is not fiction. The worker who is read by their shoes is not fiction. The man at the door deciding who counts is not fiction, and neither is the worker who is written up for asking to take home the bread that was going in the trash. Those things are real, and they are happening somewhere within a few miles of wherever you are sitting right now. If this story moved you, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss another one. Leave a comment below and tell us, What is the smallest act of respect someone once showed you that you have never forgotten? The thing that cost them nothing and gave you everything. We read every one. Until next time, stay kind, stay present, and never decide a person's worth by the look of their shoes at 7 in the morning. You never know whose father walked up that same hill before them.